Welcome back to The Ordinary, where we take an everyday perspective on life's challenges and lessons. I'm Buddy, and I'm here with my co-host, Jalp. Today, we're diving into something we all deal with, but rarely think about: the illusion of control.
You know those moments when you've done everything in your power, but things still don't go your way? Or when you stress over situations you can't influence, only to feel exhausted and defeated? That's the illusion of control in action.
Today, we'll talk about what it is, how it shows up in our lives, whether it's relationships, careers, or even small daily frustrations, and most importantly, how to let go of what we can't change.
This episode is about reflecting, learning, and finding peace in uncertainty. And as always, we'll share our personal stories, offer some practical tips, and leave you with questions to think about. So let's jump in.
All right, I think the best way to start this off is with a little bit of reflection. Think about a time when you believed you had control over something, only to realize you didn't. And how did that realization affect you? Joel, you want to start us off?
Yeah, as you probably know by now, I like to plan everything, right? I like to plan my life. I like to plan my career. And that's a good quality of mine, but that also comes with its negative side. And that negative side is that thinking that I can control some of the things that happen to me. Like, okay, if I plan this out or if I work towards this, I'll get the result that I'm going for, right? But anyone listening to this who have applied to jobs, especially the full-time recruitment, that's a perfect example where, like, you realize no matter how much you put in the effort, there's just some factors that are out of your control. Absolutely. To give an example, one of the first interview processes that I did outside of university, it was like a 3-round interview, and one of the rounds was like, you get to pitch a company, right? So I spent like a week behind creating this like slideshow deck and everything, and I think compared to anyone else who was applying at that time, my deck was a little bit, because I just spent way more time behind it than I should have, technically speaking. Went to the 3rd round. Everything was good. Talked to the director, everything. Like the way I felt in that moment was like, okay, I have the job secure. Based on the feedback I was getting, based on the conversations I was having with the people I was being interviewed by. But then, like, out of nowhere, they rejected me. And I'm like, I was kind of like, well, why? And like, oh, someone internally applied. And, it's just, sorry, like, you're a good fit, but like someone internally applied and then the job went to them. So that's like a small example. But I think many times I find myself that, like, I think I have control over the outcomes, but you don't in reality.
Yeah.
Right? So that career was one example. I don't know about you. Like, do you have any other examples?
For me, I can think of like more like a relationship example. I remember, I think my 2nd year of high school, one of my childhood best friends, she moved away. And I'd known her for like so many years prior, obviously. And obviously in the moment I was sad, but to me, I was like, you know what, although we're very far apart, I am going to do everything in my control to make sure that, our friendship doesn't get affected. But obviously, like, life happens and we're still good friends, don't get me wrong. But it took me, honestly, a few years to realize that I couldn't control every aspect of that relationship. Even if, we both wanted to, frequently check in on each other and stuff, life happens. We both got busy with our individual stuff, right? Our own educations, extracurriculars and stuff. And it was really upsetting initially because, for me, the realization struck when I was like, oh, I kind of feel a little bit distant from her. But I feel like that also made me reevaluate, like, what friendships are and, like, the different forms friendships can take. Yeah. But I think that was a huge moment. And it also happened again when I went into university. One of my other really close friends, she moved to a different country for her post-secondary education. And again, it was kind of realizing that even though I, like you said, like, you meticulously plan, like, even though I was like, I'm going to call, once a week, this and that, oftentimes, like, it doesn't go according to plan. And you kind of just have to accept that. Obviously do your best. But I feel like for me, relationships wise, like, that was where I realized, like, man, I don't have the most control that I think I do.
Yeah, and like, kind of playing along that as well, you think that people around you are going to be there always, or like the way it is currently is how you're going to spend the rest of your life. But like, change just happens when you don't expect it, or just happens so naturally and so subtly that you don't even have time to plan for it. And then like I found myself like similarly like you, okay, the friends around you, they're going through stuff, they're gonna go through changes, people might have to move, people might make decisions for their own career that's, you know, the best decision for them. And like those things are out of your control,
Yeah.
right? And like you can't plan for this thing and there's nothing you can do about that. But another question I have for you is like, have you ever found yourself trying to control the narrative around things?
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean?
Um, I'm talking about like, okay, what people thought about you. Have you found yourself trying to control or like present an idea of yourself and you feel like people don't get it or anything like that?
You know what? Yeah, like I think we've touched upon this. I think in our very first episode, where like, you know, I've gotten this before, and I feel like I identify with this now. Like, I like to identify as like a very easygoing person, or like, you know, super nonchalant. I don't know,
Mm.
you know, and like because of that, like even if I don't know, like I don't necessarily feel internally the same way, I'll change. Like I'm controlling how I act around people,
Mm.
even if it's like close friends who like literally wouldn't care how I act. You know, wouldn't care if I spoke up or something, but because I wanted to be perceived a certain way, like I've kind of like bit my tongue almost. And yeah, like does that make sense? I'm not.
I kind of get it. Like
Yeah.
you have an idea of like who you want to be and like how you want to present yourself
Mhm.
around people. So you're trying to control that
Yeah.
aspect of your life.
Yeah, and obviously I don't feel the best when I do it because like I feel like I realize later on I'm like, you know what, like there's no need for me to do that. My friends accept me for who I am. But yeah, what about you?
I think for me, one thing I realize is like, okay, this might sound like I am like holding resentment or I am like, you know, upset, but this is just from a genuine place. Sometimes I've heard people think about me in a certain way where I'm like, whoa, right? Like that's not true. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. And when I've gone through those moments or when I've heard people talk about me in a way that I would have never like imagined that like, oh, that's how people perceive me.
Yeah.
In those moments I've like tried to change the narrative, right? So I've been upset in those moments. I've talked to my friends like, hey, like people are talking about me like this or things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best advice that my friends have given me or they have like told me is like, you know, sometimes these things are out of your control and like the people that care about you know you
No, you, yeah.
who you are. So like I think that's a common thing that a lot of us kind of want to control is
Mm-hmm.
how people think about us,
Yeah.
right? And in order for us to do that, we kind of go out of our way to prove ourselves. When you enter into a room, for example, I've noticed like, you know, if people who want to be perceived as intelligent will make it an effort to make sure that their voice is heard and they like, you know,
Yeah.
so like, I think like that's natural of us to kind of control that aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But like, what about the emotional side of things? So what I mean by that is like when we're trying to control something, what kind of emotions or like what are you feeling in those moments?
Like what drives like the need to control kind? And like
Yeah.
what emotions would drive that?
Like what drives a need to control as well, like what is the repercussions of
Yeah.
that?
I think if I'm really thinking about it, like the first biggest emotion or reason as to why I personally, you know, want to obviously be in control of my life is fear. Um, you know, like fear of not being in control in the sense that like meticulously planning things or like, you know, putting in a lot of effort for a certain outcome is because you're scared if it doesn't happen, it's not going to align with what I want in my life or,
Hmm.
you know, like I think it's just fear. Like you're scared things will happen that are not good, obviously, and you want to do your best to avoid that. I
Hmm.
feel like that's a huge driver for um why you control, you know, why you meticulously control. Also maybe even like I guess an outcome of, you know, when you think you're in control but then like we talked about before, like you realize, oh shoot, I'm not actually in control as much as I thought I was. I think a huge emotion that I feel is frustration, obviously. I think that's supernatural. Like you wanted something to go a certain way, it doesn't happen. What's your immediate, you know,
Yeah.
reaction? I'm frustrated. I'm upset. I'm stressed, obviously. Yeah. What about you, Jill? When you know, are trying really hard to control something, but you realize you can't, what kind of emotions kind of bubble up? Stress, frustration, guilt?
Yeah, I think for me, when I find myself trying to control the outcomes around me or people's opinions around me or things like that, I find myself probably feeling a little bit anxious because one thing that I struggle with personally is uncertainty,
Mm.
right? It's like I find myself overthinking when I'm uncertain about the outcomes. When it comes to job application, it could be my future, it could be my career. I'm like, I mentioned this, like, I'm always like, what's next?
Mhm.
Because I always want to know what's going to happen after. And obviously, no one knows what's going to happen after.
Yeah.
It's uncertain, right? So, navigating life with that uncertainty is something I find challenging. I was talking to my older sister, like, I think this week. I'm like, sometimes I feel like I should maybe apply to jobs outside of Canada, or I should like, maybe invest in buying a house or something. But then I'll back up and be like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen in a couple of years. Would it make sense for me to invest in something or make that move? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many aspects of my life that are obviously uncertain.
Mhm.
And like that's the part of like I guess part of your 20s where you think like you have things figured out, but you just realize you have nothing figured out. Um, and like that's that uncertainty, and I'm always trying to control that.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm always like on edge, anxious, like
Mhm.
tensed up, and like always trying to figure out like what's next, what next. And because of that, I think my impatience is also kicking in,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm not able to enjoy the
Mhm.
current moment
Yeah.
because I'm trying to control everything around me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I bet that takes a huge toll on your mental health, obviously.
Mm.
I feel like, when I'm in like high stress situations and I'm like, feel like I'm losing control, I feel like I start questioning like my abilities rather than like, I start thinking like large scale. I'm questioning who I am as a person. I'm like,
Mm.
man, I'm not in control. Like I kind of suck at this, or like I'm not a good student. I'm not a good friend. I feel like because, when you realize you're not losing control and when you're incapable of like letting go, being more present when things don't go your way, you kind of blow it out of proportion.
Mm. And another thing related to that is like sometimes the outcomes you personalize or you internalize the results and you kind of make it personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I mean by that is like, okay, you apply to a job, you get rejected, or you approach someone that you're interested in, and like they just show you no interest at all. What I tend to do in those moments is like, yo, is there something wrong with me?
Yeah.
I internalize or like I take those rejections personally.
Mm.
And sometimes you got to realize like things are just out of your control.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what's going on with that person, like
Mhm.
what they're going through in life or like what they're dealing with. Or I don't know like what happened with the job application process. There's so much like things that are, you know, out of my hands. Like, but like with the results, I find myself like internalizing and making it about me. Where sometimes I'm like, it would have been better if I just realized like, yo, it is what it is, and like
That's
just
life. Yeah.
that's life, and like go with the flow.
Now, what do you think the difference is between trying to control something and then just simply influencing it? And how can we influence it instead? I'm like honestly not super clear on the difference. If you wanna,
Yeah, like let me try to attempt. Like even me, I think it's a fine,
fine line.
fine line. Like the line between influencing and control. One thing I would say is like, okay, one thing we can all agree on is that I don't know the percentage, but 70% of the things in life are out of our control.
I'd say even more.
Even more, right? We can give it any amount. But many times, what is in our control is our reaction
Mm.
or our like attitude towards
Yeah.
things, right? So when we're faced, I think that's the influence part comes there is like, what kind of emotions are you trying to influence yourself into? Or what kind of state or like what kind of attitude are you trying to influence?
Yeah.
Like when you're going through life, you're faced with so many different people and like different people's moods and different people's problems. Like sometimes somebody's going through something and they might project their feelings onto you, right? I think that's what I learned through my couple like relationships is that sometimes they're going through something or they're dealing with something that has nothing to do with me, and like because of that they're not in the right headspace. And when you're dealing with them, you kind of feel like it's because of you. So I found myself like trying to make things better even though it's not my problem at all. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And then I also think between the two, control is super like rigorous. It's what we talked about earlier. It's like I got to do this, I got to do that. And when things don't go that way, we're super hard on ourselves, or it becomes, we blow it out of proportion. It just like becomes super messy. Whereas I think influence is having goals, because I feel like there's a fine line. You want to say you don't want to control everything in your life, but I think it's obviously important to have goals and have things you want to do and work towards them. But control is when it becomes almost obsessive, and when you can't do it, there's like negative self-talk, or like, like a feeling of like failure. Versus influence would be things happen. You have these goals, you work towards them, but when when obstacles come in your way, you accept them rather than, kind of get like scared by them or like upset at that, and you're able to not work around them, but kind of accept them, if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Like, it's a more positive way. Like, maybe positivity is what influence is, rather than like, I guess, okay, how do
I think what you're trying to get at is like the whole philosophy of Stoicism is based off the fact that, okay, understand that 90% of the things that happen are out of your control.
Yeah.
Right? But what's in your control is your attitude towards it. So like you were saying, like when obstacles or things happen, the positivity and stuff like that, you can control that.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? That's the only thing you can really control.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So speaking of that fact of like, dealing with that control, what's something that you've actually let go of? Or like what you've realized, like, okay, I don't need to control this, and like kind of found peace with?
I would say one thing that I just very recently let go of, in the sense that I'm like kind of minimizing the importance it has in my life, would be my previous semester. There was a certain grade that I wasn't too happy with. And I think, what in the moment when I was like going through like all of the crazy emotions I was feeling and stuff, I was trying to control everything. I was like, no, I can't feel this right now. I have to work on getting a good grade. It was just a lot of like being hard on myself, being very rigorous with what I was doing. But after, when I got that bad grade, I feel like it honestly took up a huge like part of my brain. Like, that's all I could think about for a minute. And this was right over winter break too, so that was not fun. I was trying to, relax, obviously, before school started up again. But I don't know if that's really, I guess, like controlling how I thought about myself, because it didn't obviously make me feel too proud of myself.
Yeah.
So letting go of that and kind of realizing that, even though I would, I guess, label that as like one of the failures in my life, like it was necessary for me, because after letting go of that and kind of, again, looking at it in a more positive, like influential way, I don't know if that's the right term, I realized that it kind of prompted me to pick up better habits for this new year, for this new semester, and I've been implementing them, and I've been seeing, like the way I'm approaching certain goals in my life academically, like it's been a lot more better and more healthy, I feel. Yeah. What about you, Jill?
I would say I'm sometimes a people pleaser. Right? And the whole perspective of being a people pleaser is like always making sure that everyone around you is thinking good things about you, right? I think that was one of those things that I like had to get rid of in myself. And in order for me to do that, it's understanding that I can't control what people think about me.
Yeah.
I can't control how people feel about me. I can't control what they say about me, or anything like that, right? Only thing I can control is who I show up as, right? The values I bring, and just be myself, just be my authentic self. If they like me for who I am, then they'll be around me. If they don't, they won't be around me, right? So like stop trying to control the people in your life, meaning like making them like you or making them stay with you, right? It's out of your control. As much as I thought it was in my control, it's like there's nothing I can do. If they're mentally clocked out, or if they don't vibe with me, it's just not going to work, right? Once I got rid of trying to control that, I think I found peace personally, and my relationships were more authentic, because people appreciated me for who I am, and people who genuinely got to know me will eventually get to know who I am, right? Everything else is out of my control, so that aspect. But is there anything that you kind of struggle letting go of?
I would say maybe kind of going off of what you said, I think I have ideas of myself that kind of fuel me to want to be in control because I think, I'm lacking in certain areas. I don't want to get too into it, but like,
Yeah.
I think that's something I need to let go of, like certain thoughts that I have on myself because they honestly kind of seep into like everything I'm doing on the daily. And like some things, I've kind of thought of myself, but also some things that other people have told me, and I'm sure it came out of like a good place or something, but it very much resonated with me, and it kind of affects what I do on the daily. And as much as like, I don't know, constructive criticism is important and, like tough love and all that, I feel like those things that I've kind of, like you said earlier, internalized about myself, they're not super like good for me. And because, let's say when I do lack in certain things, I kind of use it as a scapegoat. And like, I think it also just affects like my self-esteem when I can or can't do something. I would say certain aspects of my own self-image I need to let go of because they're not healthy. Like certain expectations people have of me, I need to let go of that. But yeah, overall, just like certain thoughts that I have in myself, I need to let go of because they kind of hold me back from doing certain things and also hold me back from letting go as well. I need to let go so I can let go. Very roundabout, but yeah. What about you? Do you think there's anything you're struggling to let go of or something you want to do in the future to let go?
Like I think for me, the main thing that I find hard to let go, it's not let go of, but I guess, yeah, let go of is your career expectations and aspirations. I'm not saying I want to let go of my career expectations, aspirations, but it's letting go of focusing too much on the outcomes, right? I'm so like outcome oriented sometimes that I feel like I need to control everything about my career. Like I need to make this move because if I make this move, it will lead to this. And then once I get there, I'll do this and then I'm going to be able to get that, right? But in life, it never works like that. No matter how much you try, like you try to plan your career, you try to plan things, like opportunities will come when you least expect them, and rejection will come when you least expect them. People get laid off. Like these things happen. As much as you think that you are in control of your career and like your goals, I'm coming to a realization that you are in control. Like you can put in the effort, but if you think that you're guaranteed an outcome, that's not the case.
That's not the case. And kind of going off of that, like I'm thinking about people that I know that I've met in university and stuff that are very like career outcome goal oriented, which is honestly something I look up to in them. But at the same time, what I've noticed is when they do, for example, something small like getting a bad grade or not doing well on assignment or something, I think they take that a lot harder than when you are less, outcome focused. I feel like they have very like, is it farsightedness? Farsight? I don't know if that's the right term, but they're thinking so far into the future that even something like a small road bump seems like a huge mountain to them,
And I think that's because like, okay, to give it into like sports analogy, like the way I think it, like this is my playbook, right? Like if I make this play, it's gonna lead to this opportunity, and then I'll be able to do that. Right? Like I always think of things like that. So that's why I like to plan things, or I like to remember. I always tell you like, look where you want to be and work backwards. Think of the steps you need to take, right? But what I'm starting to realize is that it's not that simple. Or it's not that easy. Where like one thing is not going to lead to the outcome that you expect it to be. One thing can lead to like 10 other things that you never even thought of. Like I'm sounding so conceptual right now, but like that's the reality of things. Like sometimes you don't even know what's out there, right? And you don't even know what to expect. And if you have such a strict, rigid plan about life, or like those people, which I think I'm probably one of those people, is that when a small road bump comes, you're so like, you're not able to handle it properly.
Right? And like I think we're speaking super conceptually because like control is something that's in every single aspect of life. It's kind of hard to give it, even though we do it all the time, it's kind of hard to give like a singular example. And also on top of that, when you're trying so hard to be in control, I think it's just exhausting.
100%.
Right? Like I'm sure you can relate, and like I also can relate. Like it's very exhausting, and yes, it's good to, look where you want to be and then work your way back and stuff. But if you're so focused on something so far away that you're exhausted in your day-to-day life, like it kind of makes it not as worth it,
And I think I'm a victim to that. I think like a lot of people listening to this might be a victim to that. One of the downsides of being like so goal oriented or detailed about life is that you're never really able to enjoy the process because you are focused on the goal. You think that once I achieve that goal, then I deserve to be happy.
Yeah.
That you're not able to be happy in the present. But the present and the outcome, everything is out of your control. So it's kind of a fine line because like there's good things about trying to control your life, right?
Yeah.
So what would be some of the things? Like, do you think that the illusion of control is always bad, or there are times when it kind of helps us stay motivated or hopeful?
I definitely think, like you mentioned, fine line. I think it's a careful balance. You want to obviously, because control also comes with feeling capable. When people want to be in control of stuff, like, I think it like has to do with their capability. Like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and that kind of relates to goals. And obviously, goals are super duper important in life. But when you have those goals, when you have, very practical steps to what you're going to do in a day, in a week, etc., it definitely keeps you motivated and hopeful, for sure. But if you don't have balance and if you become so lost in controlling everything, then like we talked about before, you're going to get tired.
Yeah.
And you're going to exhaust yourself, and it's going to be 12 times harder than it would have been if you, took it slow. I think control is good, but in small doses.
Yeah.
Don't make a habit of, and don't be doing it 24/7, 365, because that's not good for you. Yeah.
And I think like when you're trying to be so controlling of your life, it stops you from being flexible. And I think flexibility is the key to navigating the things in life, because roadblocks are going to come, events are going to happen that you didn't expect. Like, there's so many things that can be at play. If you're just such a control freak, like sometimes I feel like I'm a control freak when it comes to my personal life and stuff, that if you are not flexible and if you're not smart enough to kind of adjust to the ups and downs, then you're just going to feel demotivated, you're going to be stressed, and you're just going to call it quits.
Yeah.
I think. So like the key to control is having that flexibility.
Also, in conversations about control and letting go and stuff, a huge thing that comes up is like surrendering. And I feel like just in a normal day-to-day context, surrendering seems like, like you're weak or something like that. We talked about the emotions control like arouses in us, like, like stress, fear, etc. When you think about surrendering or just being at terms, accepting what's happening to you, think about those emotions.
Accepting reality,
you almost feel relaxed. You feel calm. You're able to take a breath. I feel like, surrendering has a little bit of like a negative connotation to it, but at the same time, I think practically in life, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think like when you start accepting the reality around you, you start making decisions with a more clear mindset, with a more of a logical approach. But when you are so focused on controlling things around you, it's more of making decisions in an emotional aspect. Like, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. I think positivity is something that's super huge in the sense that, like, if I just accept things how they are, like, how do I know things will work out for me in the end? That's when you have to have, like, a glass half full look on life. Like, the universe will, it's very, like, manifesty and whatnot, but, like, the universe will make it work out for you.
Yeah.
You just have to have faith in whatever and whoever you put your faith in.
Yeah. Control the things you can control, which is your head.
Yeah.
If you can control your mind, you can control the world around you.
I think that's paraphrasing a quote we know, but yeah.
Yeah. Vachamrut Sarangpur 1.
Love it. Is it that one?
Yeah, Sarangpur 1.
Wow, look at that.
Conquer the mind, conquer the world.
Conquer the mind, conquer the world. Exactly. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today on this deep dive into the illusion of control. If there's one takeaway from this episode, it's that trying to control everything doesn't give us power. It often just leaves us drained and frustrated.
When we learn to focus on what we can influence, our reactions, our efforts, and our mindset, it's like freeing ourselves from invisible chains. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means finding peace and clarity in what's truly important.
So this week, we challenge you to reflect. What's one thing you're holding on to that you could let go of? Share your thoughts with us on social media, send it to us via our email, or in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, As John Kabat-Zinn said, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf.
Until next time, stay ordinary but extraordinary in your own way. Bye for now.